shot.
To Beckers, hey, pull up, tough 15-footer, got the foul.
The Indiana Fever's season has officially hit rock bottom. And just when you thought things couldn't possibly get worse, it feels like fate has decided to deal another crushing blow. Because here we are again, talking about injuries, setbacks, heartbreak, and uncertainty, and it is absolutely brutal for everyone involved. From the players, to the fans, to the coaching staff, to the front office scrambling for answers, because the news just broke minutes ago, and it is bad. Sydney Colson has torn her ACL, and at her age, with the mileage on her legs, the chances of her ever getting back to the court at the same level are slim, meaning this might truly be the end of her career, and if that wasn't enough to make the entire Fever fanbase sink into despair, Aari McDonald has suffered a broken bone in her right foot, and both of them are officially out for the season after injuries sustained in last night's game in Phoenix, leaving the Fever not only gutted but completely exposed at the most fragile position on the roster, the point guard spot that was already stretched beyond belief, and now you're staring at the possibility of asking Caitlin Clark to come back sooner than anyone would have wanted, because frankly, what other option is there? But before we even get to that, we need to just acknowledge how devastating this news is, because Sydney Colson has been one of those respected veterans, a voice in the locker room, someone who may not always fill up the stat sheet but brings leadership, composure, and toughness, and for her to go down like this is nothing short of tragic, especially given how late in her career she is, with most players not being able to return at a high level from an ACL tear at that stage, and for Aari McDonald, who was just beginning to enjoy what felt like a true career renaissance, rediscovering her confidence and speed and carving out a role that mattered. This injury is like pulling the rug out from under her, and as much as you want to hope and believe she bounced back fully, foot injuries are notoriously tricky, sometimes leading to long-term setbacks or reoccurrence, and though basketball isn't as violent as football, we've seen enough examples of talented athletes derailed by injuries like this that you can't dismiss the danger. So the human element here matters. We're talking about two women who worked their whole lives for this game, who put their bodies on the line night after night, and now they're sidelined, heartbroken, and facing months of rehab. And all you can do is send prayers and hope for the best. But from the Fever's perspective, this is a nightmare scenario in the middle of what was already a chaotic season, because these aren't minor injuries you can tape up and play through. These are season-ending, franchise-shaking injuries that leave you scrambling for answers, and the timing couldn't possibly be worse. Because not only do you lose your starting point guard, who was already a replacement for another injured starter, but you also lose depth, you lose stability, and you lose any margin for error in a league where depth already decides games. And that brings us to the million-dollar question. What now? What do you do? How do you salvage a playoff push in a season that looks cursed? And yes, fans are already shouting from the rooftops, sign a guard, but it's not that simple. You can't just plug and play in this league. There are salary cap realities, roster limits, contracts, and timing rules that make this far more complicated than fantasy basketball, and when you really break it down, you have to ask yourself, who is even available at this point? Because the trade deadline just passed literally 4 days ago. So trading for someone is not an option anymore, meaning you're stuck with free agency, hardship contracts, or waiving a player. And one of the rumors floating around is that the Fever might have to waive Chloe Bai to make room for a point guard. And you can imagine the kind of heated debate that sets off among fans who don't want to lose any more pieces, but at the same time realize the desperation of the moment. Because without a true floor general, your offense collapses. And speaking of offense, that's where the chatter about Kennedy Carter comes in, because a lot of people are hollering for Kennedy Carter to be the answer, and on paper, it makes sense. She can handle the ball. She can score in bunches, she's dynamic, she brings energy, and she's still relatively young. But the problem is never about her talent, it's about her fit, her attitude, her locker room presence, and most importantly, the reality that there is only one basketball to go around. And if you drop Kennedy Carter into a lineup that already features scorers like Kelsey Mitchell, Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Natasha Howard, and a system that thrives on balance, suddenly you have a combustible situation where she wants to throw up 20 shots a game. Kelsey Mitchell wants the ball. Caitlin needs touches to orchestrate the offense. Boston needs her post feeds. And it just becomes chaos. And as much as fans love the idea of adding raw firepower, coaches know you can't win long-term if the locker room chemistry is fragile. So the Fever front office has to weigh all of that very carefully, because making the wrong move here could sink not only this season but set back the development of the young core. And yet, standing pat doesn't feel like an option either. Because you can't just keep rolling with no point guards, and that's why everyone keeps circling back to Caitlin Clark. Because whether she's ready or not, whether the original timeline was mid-August or late August, whether you risk aggravating her condition or not, it feels like she has to come back. Because otherwise, the Fever literally don't have a functioning offense. And this is the last thing you want to do with your generational rookie who is supposed to be the franchise cornerstone for the next decade. But circumstances have cornered the Fever into this exact position. And that's why you hear fans screaming, "Don't rush Caitlin Clark back," while at the same time acknowledging that she has to play, because they don't know what else the Fever can do. And you have to feel for Caitlin here too, because she's under immense pressure. Not only carrying the expectations of the franchise, but also the weight of the league's spotlight. Every move she makes dissected by media, and now she might be thrust back into the fire earlier than anticipated because of a roster crisis. And if that wasn't enough drama, you also have fans throwing out wild trade suggestions. Like trade for Kate Martin, which of course can't happen because the deadline has passed. Or bring back Grace Berger, which sounds intriguing, until you realize she just got rooped by Dallas for another 7 days, literally 2 days ago, making her unavailable, so you're left spinning your wheels. Looking at what's left on the free agent market, and it's not exactly inspiring, which only fuels the despair and the sense that this season is cursed. Because every solution seems blocked, every option carries risk, and every decision feels like choosing the lesser of evils. And meanwhile, fans on social media are pouring out their emotions, some heartbroken for Sid and Aari, some furious at the coaching staff, some screaming about management, some just throwing their hands up and saying, "This is nuts, this is cursed, this is the worst luck in the league." And honestly, you can't blame them, because if you've been watching this season unfold, it feels like the Fever can't catch a break. Every time they take a step forward, something drags them 2 steps back. And when you add the emotional punch of losing to respected and well-liked players, it goes beyond X's and O's. This is about morale, about the locker room looking around and wondering how much more they can take. And you joke about the coach suiting up, but deep down you know, it feels like that's the level of desperation right now. And through it all, the central theme is heartbreak. Because Aari McDonald and Sydney Colson did not deserve this. No player deserves to have their season or possibly career ripped away in an instant. And yet, this is the cruel reality of sports, and the Fever are left to pick up the pieces, trying to salvage pride, trying to salvage hope, and trying to figure out how to move forward in a season that feels like it's spiraling into chaos. But here's the thing, fans are still here, they're still screaming, still arguing, still debating, still caring, which means the Fever still have something to fight for, still have an audience invested. And if there's one silver lining in this endless storm, it's that adversity like this forces teams to reveal their true character. And for the Indiana Fever, we're about to find out exactly what kind of character this team has. Because with the playoffs slipping away, with stars hurt, with the fan base in pain, with the national spotlight glaring, the Fever have no choice but to fight, and that fight begins now. No excuses, no shortcuts, only grit, determination, and the hope that Caitlin Clark's return can steady the ship before it completely sinks. And until then, all you can do is say prayers for Sid and Aari, send love their way, and brace yourself, because this ride is about to get even.
Trying to get rid of Cunningham. Cunningham just hanging on her. Lee inside, left hand. Offensive rebound, and gets the finish.
So yeah, at this point it feels like Stephanie White has her built-in excuse for why this season is spiraling the way it is. Because after the latest wave of devastating injuries, you look around and realize this Fever campaign has gone from promising to tragic almost overnight. And the playoff hopes that fans were still clinging to a week ago now feel like they've either completely evaporated or, at best, been reduced to the likelihood of a quick first-round exit. And that is such a gut punch not only for the organization but for everyone who has been riding the highs and lows of this season with so much passion, because you can't help but be heartbroken watching it all unravel before your eyes. And yet here we are, with people online already shouting from the rooftops that it's time to call Kennedy Carter and hand her the keys. Because fans see an elite bucket getter, a dynamic ball handler, a player who not only has the offensive firepower to give this team a chance, but also someone who, if you really look at her game, can bring defensive grit too, something that often gets overlooked. And some folks are saying loud and clear that if you don't stop playing around and sign Kennedy Carter, then you're basically waving the white flag. But as much as that excitement makes sense emotionally, the reality is there's a complicated set of moving parts here. Because you're not operating in a vacuum, you're navigating salary cap constraints, roster limits, hardship contracts, and the lingering chemistry questions about how she fits in alongside players like Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, Natasha Howard, and especially Caitlin Clark, who will eventually return. And it's tough to wrap your head around how all of it works logistically without some tough sacrifices. Which is why the front office is facing enormous pressure right now, and you think back to the trade deadline that just passed a few days ago, and you realize this whole situation is even more frustrating because they had a chance to address depth. They had a chance to add another reliable guard before things got catastrophic, and instead they sat on their hands, choosing to gamble on the existing roster. And now here we are with 2 point guards out for the year, and fans asking, how did you not see this coming? Which makes the leadership look short-sighted and reactive instead of proactive. And in hindsight, names like Kate Martin or Grace Berger would have been absolutely perfect fits. Because Kate has the composure, the versatility, and the ability to slot into different roles seamlessly, and Grace not only knows this team inside and out, but also has the steady floor game that could have patched this crisis beautifully. But the cruel twist is that Grace just re-upped with the Dallas Wings on a 7-day deal on August 5th, which means she's not available. And if you're Dallas, you'd have to be crazy not to lock her in for the rest of the season now that you've seen how desperate the Theberg situation is. So that ship has sailed. And all of this only amplifies the central dilemma that fans are now debating fiercely. Do you even bring Caitlin Clark back this season? Especially now that playoff hopes are slim and the risk of rushing her back too soon could have long-term consequences. Because on one hand you know Caitlin, the competitor, is not wired to sit out if she feels even remotely healthy. She's the type of athlete who will do everything in her power to fight for her team. And you respect the hell out of that. But on the other hand, the bigger picture looms over every decision. And you wonder if it's worth risking the face of the franchise and arguably the face of the league for a playoff push that likely ends in heartbreak. And that's the tension that makes this moment so dramatic. Because every path forward has consequences. And you can sense how heavy that burden is, not only for the coaches and management, but for Caitlin herself, who has been incredibly candid about just how challenging this injury process has been, telling Sue about the hardest parts of her season, explaining how she went through the initial injury, sat out for games, returned and played really well, felt like herself again, was shooting the ball great, putting up numbers, and then suddenly got hurt again, and the cycle repeated. And that stop-and-go rhythm is mentally draining in ways that fans don't always understand. Because it's not as simple as being told 6 weeks, circle this date, you're back for the Connecticut Sun game. It's about waking up